It is our last Breakouts episode of the day on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. And our last awesome guest is Alfredo Brown of FootballGuys. We are here to talk about tight ends. Alfredo, welcome to the show. Tell us about FootballGuys and the wonderful content you have.
Oh, so much wonderful content over at FootballGuys. You can check us out over on youtube.com/@FootballGuysFantasy. We've got the Football Guys Fantasy Show, the Dynasty Show, the Audible. It's been around for 18 years, so it can legally be drafted if there's a war or anything like that. So, yeah, Football Guys been around forever, man. Got a lot of cool new content coming out.
Yeah, well, I think we're 16 or 17 years. So, props to you, Audible. All right, we're going to talk about breakout tight ends. Heath is here. Dave, we're trying to get Dave back. He had to do some video work after the JJ McCarthy news, so we're hoping he hops on for this episode. Is this the year? Dave, speaking of Dave, he had called Kyle Pitts a bust on our bust episode earlier today. Is this the year of the Kyle Pitts breakout, Heath?
Yeah. I think that Kyle Pitts will finish better relative to his average draft position than he ever has. How's that? I don't think he's going to set a career high in receiving yards. Probably sets a career high in touchdowns. I think this is a weird position for me, at least, when it comes to talking about breakouts, because there are several guys that I think are going to score more fantasy points than they ever have. But also I'm not as high on them as everybody else, and so I don't draft them.
Like Dalton Kincaid, right?
Right.
Okay. Alfredo, is this going to be the year for Kyle Pitts? Finally get that breakout?
I mean, if there was going to be a year, it would hopefully be the year where Arthur Smith is gone and Kirk Cousins gets added in there. So I think Heath is like saying all the right things here. We could see the most touchdowns for Kyle Pitts. We could see the most receptions for Kyle Pitts. And I guess breakout is relative. It feels just like all the first 7 or 8 tight ends. It's all pretty flat. So if he breaks out, we're kind of just getting exactly what we drafted in the first place.
So who are you excited about? Who's a breakout for you, Alfredo?
Well, what are we defining breakout as? Like how low are they being drafted?
No idea. We will never know the answer. Okay.
What is breakout?
At the minimum, best year of their career.
And I would say these guys need to have a serious fantasy impact here. Right? They have to be very good.
I think for a fantasy breakout, a guy that I think is just still really undervalued, and maybe the ADP will catch up as drafts start to happen, is Pat Freiermuth. He's sort of been the Jalen Waddle of tight ends. He's had 3 very different years throughout his career. Tight end 13 as a rookie with a bunch of touchdowns, and then tight end 8 in 2023, only scoring 2 touchdowns, but he was getting the volume. And last season was just a nightmare with injuries, almost exactly like Jalen Waddle. Last season was just a nightmare for everyone on the Steelers. Freiermuth missed 5 games. He only had 2 targets inside the 10-yard line, which was one of the big things that stood out to me. So you didn't see him getting the volume. You didn't see him getting the touchdowns. And I think a lot of people are just holding that in the back of their mind. So now he's going as a tight end 15. Whenever I'm looking for a tight end in this range that could, quote, break out, it's a guy that could be a top 2 target on his team and get, 6 targets at least and be good after the catch, have some touchdown upside. We know Arthur Smith likes to use the tight end. He actually uses 11 personnel, the least amount of any coach, especially last season. So we're not going to see Pat Freiermuth leave the field. There's going to be 2 tight ends on that field almost all the time. So I really like Pat Freiermuth as a guy that could break out. Same with some other guys down the list I'm sure we'll get to.
Oh, yeah, look at this. Join practice day for our shows. That's terrific. Comment from T. Martin there. Heath, how about you? Who's a breakout tight end?
I mean, I'll go with the free space and my number 1 tight end, and that's Trey McBride. I think that you could see some people are expecting a major volume drop off because Marvin Harrison's there. I don't think that necessarily has to happen. I just expect it to be a very concentrated attack with Harrison seeing 25 to 30% of the targets and McBride 20 to 25%. The difference is that McBride's efficiency will be much better with a true number 1 wide receiver drawing that attention. And I think we see a big uptick in his touchdowns from the year before. He's almost always the number 3 or 4 tight end in fantasy drafts. And really my tight end strategy is just wait until round 4 and then draft Trey McBride, because I think he should be the first tight end off the board.
Where do you have McBride, Alfredo?
He's my tight end 3, but honestly, my first 4 tight ends are all just a giant amoeba cluster of rankings from Kelsey, Andrews, McBride, and all just huddled together.
So how do we feel about Dalton Kincaid then?
I don't dislike Dalton Kincaid. I've got him ranked pretty high. I know he sounds like you're not too high on Dalton Kincaid. There were enough things last year, the peripheral metrics and the things that he did as a rookie, and now just the opening for targets on this offense, a Josh Allen-led offense, that leads me to believe that we can get a ceiling. But I think it's going to be very similar to a Kyle Pitts, where how high is that ceiling? You're kind of already drafting him at where he should be going. So I look back and you see, okay, the final 11 weeks of the season, Dalton Kincaid and Sam LaPorta have nearly the exact same targets, exact same receptions per game, same yards per game. Big difference was touchdowns. So if touchdown variance is a thing that separates Dalton Kincaid from the guy who was tight end 1 last year, yeah, sure, I'll bet on that being better this year in a Josh Allen-led offense and potentially even more targets for him.
And I think Alfredo just made a point that I've not really taken into account enough, is that like the second half numbers for Kincaid could predict a breakout, because second half numbers, while I think they generally don't matter as much as people think they do matter for rookie pass catchers. And so like, if you were telling me that the target share from his last 11 regular season games is going to get him to 111 targets, then it becomes much easier for me to see the breakout that everyone's drafting him to have. It does bother me a little bit that the 2 playoff games, he didn't really quite maintain that same pace. I think that he and Kyle Pitts should basically be drafted back to back, because they both have the potential to jump into that top 4 tier, undoubtedly. And they both have the downside to not really matter this year. I don't mean that in a you're cutting them, but they're just like tight end 10, tight end 11. Who cares? And the thing that I kind of think is weird, and I guess it's because Drake London, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone make the argument that Dalton Kincaid is better at anything than Kyle Pitts.
Well, I don't know that who's more talented than Kyle Pitts? Which tight ends? I'm not saying that there are none. I'm asking which tight ends are more talented than Pitts.
Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce, George Kittle,
Brock Bowers. But Pitts is supposed to be in this discussion. Like that's how he was.
That's what I'm saying, though. I think Kincaid and Pitts should be pretty much back to back. They haven't done it yet, but we have reason to believe they could, and they also might just be Jags.
Hey, Dave.
Jags is a bit steep, even for Pitts.
How do you feel about Kincaid?
I think he's got a chance to be his team's #1 target getter, and that's what keeps him in my top 5 among fantasy tight ends. And we've seen the explosiveness from him as recently as last season. And he can still be a red zone threat and all that other good stuff for Buffalo. But there was a point where I was putting Kincaid ahead of guys like McBride and maybe even Andrews. I can't go there anymore. Just can't.
The explosiveness is kind of what worries me, because his ADOT was so low and his yak was almost nothing. Like I think he almost has to be like a Zach Ertz, or maybe he's just things are going to be different this year. But if he's the guy he was last year, he's got to be like a Zach Ertz volume, because there wasn't really explosiveness.
I get that. And I guess that's the difference between assuming that last year is who he is, or that there's a projection to be made and he's better than that. And the guy that we saw in college is that type of guy. And the answer is we just don't know. And that's part of the problem with a lot of tight ends, with a lot of players in general, obviously in fantasy.
Yeah. So is it worth taking Kincaid in the 5th round, or should we wait for the Kittle, Ingram, Pitts group? Alfredo, what do you think?
I'd rather wait if I can. I mean, I think all these guys end up being good values because it's just so flat throughout those top 7. But if I can go ahead and get George Kittle a full round later, I'm more than happy to do that. I did that in the Flex League draft with Jamie, where I got George Kittle as tight end 7 off the board on the 5-6 turn. I was really happy to get George Kittle as pick 601. Like I'll do that with Dalton Kincaid going like 16 spots ahead of that. You get fantastic value that way.
Yeah,
I like that. I think that's good. And if Ayuk leaves San Francisco,
right, exactly.
He's wearing
wow.
he's back at practice today wearing a San Francisco 49ers shirt. So I think he's staying in San Francisco.
Steelers underwear though.
It might be Steelers. Somebody made the joke he was going to rip it off and have a Steelers shirt, like an NWO type thing. One of my favorite stats at the tight end position.
Can I take a break? Sorry.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a break. After you sign up for BetMGM, let's do it. Use the bonus code FANTASY, and you're going to get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. And here's how you do it. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code FANTASY. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you will receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. That's a ton of money, $1,500 in bonus bets. Make sure you use the bonus code FANTASY when you sign up. We are so excited to hear about Heath's awesome tight end stat after this break on FFT. Okay, Heath, you're up.
Dalton Kincaid had one more target than George Kittle did last year. George Kittle scored 51 more fantasy points.
Is that just a fun stat, or does that mean something to you?
Well, first off, George Kittle is one of the most efficient tight ends in NFL history. But I mean, it's a fun stat also, and it highlights that like Dalton Kincaid's going to have to be much more efficient this year to justify where he's being drafted.
So yeah, I get it, but we usually don't judge rookie tight ends on their fit. Like we usually don't judge tight ends on their rookie season efficiency. I feel like because LaPorta had such a good year, I think we might be judging Dalton Kincaid's rookie season a little bit harshly.
LaPorta wasn't actually very efficient either, except for the touchdowns.
Really?
I don't generally judge tight ends on their opportunity.
What do you mean?
Like a rookie tight end doesn't get to play that much. It's not that surprising. A rookie tight end doesn't see a huge target volume. It's not that surprising. I don't know that I necessarily expect his usage down the field or ability to break tackles to change that much.
All right. Well, listen, this show's been like all about Dalton Kincaid, so I think we can put that to rest. He does need to be used down the field more. That would certainly help his explosiveness, and we'll see. I mean, look, we haven't even said it, but Stephon Diggs is not on the team anymore. Right. That's obviously a huge deal. Dave, who was a breakout tight end for you? Alfredo said Pat Freiermuth. He said Trey McBride, who he has as number one. Who's a breakout tight end for you?
I really like Brock Bowers, and it's the talent more so than the situation. But from what I saw in the preseason game, he was being used similarly to how he was used at Georgia. He was lining up all over the place. He ran a decent amount of routes, not as many as I would have liked to have seen. He did some blocking as well, but he's going to be a matchup problem. And the fact that the Raiders weren't just using him in the slot and in line as a typical tight end, that makes me feel good about his potential this year. If Gardner Minshew's starting quarterback, we saw last year, he did pepper one guy with targets, but they were short targets. That could be good for Devontae Adams, but I think he'll have a second short area target that he'll like to lean on in Brock Bowers. And I also think he'll be able to add a little something in the Raiders' short yardage goal line package so that it's not going to be all Zamir White, that they can use Bowers a little bit on some gimmick plays that might end up meaning a touchdown or two. And I'm not saying that reaching for Brock Bowers is a good idea. Reaching for any tight end is a bad idea. But if I'm getting Bowers right around 100th overall, just the chance to get somebody who's this much of an athletic freak, who's got potential to be second on his team in targets, and for that number of targets to be bigger than 90, yeah, I think I'm happy to take that chance on somebody like Bowers.
Alfredo, do you think any of these players can be, significantly better than they were last year, just in terms of points per game, not necessarily fantasy finish? Sam LaPorta, Mark Andrews, Jake Ferguson.
Out of those three, so Mark Andrews was already surprisingly very, very good in points per game. I don't think Sam LaPorta gets better in points per game because I think we see some touchdown variance there. It's kind of de facto ends up being Jake Ferguson, but I actually think there was a lot of meat left on the bone for Jake Ferguson last year. He surprised everyone with the targets, but now Dallas doesn't have Tony Pollard and they're just down more weapons. They could be passing more than ever. I don't really know that they did a whole bunch to add real pass catchers that are going to take away from Jake Ferguson. And he's one of those guys we keep talking about, like touchdown variants with tight ends. And it's usually you want one or the other. Either give me lots of touchdowns or give me volume. If you can, give me both. That's great. With Ferguson, he led all tight ends in red zone targets and still only ended up with 5 touchdowns. So if there's a guy who could see just a total reversal and a spike and jump into the top 5 of tight ends and be really surprising, yeah, it's Jake Ferguson.
I 100% agree. And I think like it's fair to make the argument that we're drafting CeeDee Lamb as the number 1 wide receiver, those who are, based largely on the last 11 games and how he spiked and turned into an elite fantasy playmaker in his last 11 games. In Jake Ferguson's last 11 games, including the playoffs, he averaged 14 PPR fantasy points per game.
Mm-hmm. And he had 30 something points in the playoffs. If you just take that and add it to his season total, he gets a 1.5 more fantasy points per game based on that one playoff game. Which was...
I did say including the playoffs. So you can't add it, you can't count it again.
No, I'm just saying if you add it to his full season number.
Yes.
Right. You add a 1.5 fantasy points per game. Before the show, Alfredo said that his must-have guys at cost are Trey McBride, Dalton Kincaid, George Kittle, and Jake Ferguson. So I think we pretty much covered those. Your breakouts are Bowers. I guess you agree with Dave there. Freiermuth and Luke Musgrave. You want to talk about that one?
Yeah, so this one, honestly, it kind of just caught me off guard. I've just been going through my rankings and being like, okay, who actually has some sort of potential to break out? And you start to look for archetypes, athletic guys, younger, finding their way in the offense. And really what I like here is that you've got a good offense, a good passer, but a very ambiguous target grouping. Like there's not a specific target funnel. If Christian Watson's in the field, he's not getting everything. If Jaden Reed's in the field, he's not getting everything. We really don't have, and even Matt LaFleur was annoyed by this, they don't have a wide receiver 1. So the fact that Luke Musgrave could actually end up being the top target earner on this team, while not likely, he has a path to being top 2 on the team in targets. And I know that right now, Tucker Kraft is the other tight end on here that was drafted same year. He's got a really bad pec injury, just taken off the PUP list. He started practicing, but the Packers are notoriously really, really slow with these injury recovery timelines. So if we get even just a few 3 or 4 games where Luke Musgrave can play without Tucker Kraft taking snaps away from him, we could see him actually really start to blossom. Last year, he had 4 top 12 finishes in his first 9 games. And to do that as a rookie, I mean, we get excited about LaPorta, Kincaid, all the other guys. Musgrave's season just got cut short, but he was on his way to doing some pretty similar stuff.
Well, I think one thing is interesting, unless you guys have anything else, we can wrap it there. But interesting about this position is that just on this show, you heard breakouts at every level, right? You heard Trey McBride as a breakout, Dalton Kincaid, Kyle Pitts, Brock Bowers, Jake Ferguson, all throughout the draft. You've got guys with potential. Dave, it does make me wonder, what's the best strategy here? Just keep waiting?
Well, we can already rule out taking a tight end early unless it's tight end premium, because ADP is telling us that late round 2 is the absolute earliest where you could find Kelsey or LaPorta to go. I think if you want to get one at a fair value, you're probably going to be okay. But I also think it comes down to how badly do you want one? And do you still see that positional advantage that we used to talk about with Kelsey and Kittle in his heyday and Mark Andrews too? Mark Andrews counts in there too. Yeah. If you want that positional edge over the majority of your league, fine. But we also talked about as many as 10 tight ends. I'm just guessing the number. I wasn't on for the whole show, but 10 tight ends that could be within 2.5 to 3 PPR points per game from each other. So I don't know how big that edge will be if half the league has a tight end that is just a no doubt about it starter. So getting one at a fair value at fair ADP is a good idea. Just the other point being that if you hate the idea of streaming tight ends, you don't want to do that work, then prioritize it. Not reaching in a big way, but probably if that's how you feel, you'll probably take a tight end with one of your first 4 picks, and you'll probably feel okay about it.
Take a top 4 in round 4, like McBride, Andrews, Kelsey, LaPorta. Not LaPorta. He's not going to fall that far. One of those 3 is going to be available in round 4. Draft them.
Okay, but if you've got other people in your league that are doing the same thing and you whiff on them, I mean, is the fallback plan that 3rd tier with Ingram, Kittle, and Pitts? Probably.
It has been for me. And then when I don't get them, I panic draft Jake Ferguson.
Yeah, and I should have probably said this. Kittle's my tight end 5, so like I don't consider him in the 3rd tier. But
okay, 2nd tier, 3rd tier.
Last question, Alfredo. What would be your advice for someone who's never seen Star Wars?
Oh man. Okay. I'm a purist and I believe you should start on episode 4, but I tried this recently with a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they wanted no part of it. After about 15 minutes, they said it was the worst movie they had ever seen. And my heart broke so fast. So start with something a little bit newer. Maybe they'll like that, like The Mandalorian, one of those.
And honestly, a 12-year-old and 8-year-old is like the exact person to gauge how Adam's going to react to something. So
I've seen them. But recently, I watched them all within like the last 5 years, and they're terrific. The first three, the original 3, 4, 5, 6, like they're really good. I mean, I think there's got a lot of potential here with Star Wars. I think they could be pretty popular. All right, yeah. Thank you to Alfredo Brown at the Pretend GM on Twix and Football Guys. You can find his content there. For Dave and Heath and Alfredo, I am Adam. Thanks for tuning into the bonanza of breakouts, and we'll talk to you on Friday with something. I don't even know what our topic is, but then we'll have a mailbag for Saturday. But there will be a show on Friday. See you then.